Meet Chia Sokre. Chia lives in a small village in Cambodia with her family, and they grow rice and cassava. What they grow isn't always enough to make ends meet, and so they also keep some pigs. It's a good way of supplementing the household income, and it also provides protein for the family. Even so, the family doesn't always have enough to eat, and there are many months in the year when they go hungry. Chia and her family are really important people. They are amongst the 1.5 billion small family farmers, men and women, who live and work on around 475 million family farms that are no more than 2 hectares in size. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that up to 80% of all food consumed in the world is grown by small family farmers like Chia. And together, they look after around 75% of the Earth's natural resources. Small family farmers like Chia are at the heart of global agriculture. And they are amongst our most powerful resources when it comes to meeting the challenge of feeding the world sustainably in the face of climate change. But despite their significance, families like Chia's are often the least able to influence those issues that are vital to their way of life and survival, and to their ability to rise to this challenge of feeding the world. This became particularly apparent to me when a few years ago I attended a high-level conference in Singapore on food security in Asia. At the time, I had just started working as a research fellow at the University of Sydney on a 2-year research project analyzing the key challenges facing food and agricultural systems in the region and how governments were responding to them. The conference began with a lot of talk around the importance of small family farmers. But as the discussions continued, it struck me that those who had the most prominent voices at the conference were representatives of large agribusinesses and giant biotechnology corporations. On the second day of the conference, I found myself in a room with about 200 other people, listening to yet another senior official from one of these companies go on about how biotechnology, particularly genetically modified seeds, were the answer to Asia's hunger problems. Now, by this stage, I truly felt that all the voices supporting the interests and rights of small farmers had been silenced by the presence and active contributions by people like the speaker. This made me deeply uncomfortable. So during the Q&A session, I asked him, could we really advocate the use of any technology, let alone genetically modified seeds, without first taking into consideration the broader social and economic contexts within which this technology was being proposed, and the implications it would have on those who are at the heart of this picture, the small family farmers? Of course, I never really got a response to my question, and the chair of the panel quickly moved things along. But afterwards, a number of people came up to me, people who work very closely with small family farmers in Asia, people who've done a lot of work in this area. They came up to me and quietly told me that they were really glad that I'd made the intervention that I had, and that they were in firm agreement with what I'd said. It made me realize that those who are the most significant actors when it comes to global food security are quite often the least influential when it comes to the very issues at the heart of this challenge. Subsequently, my own research became geared towards looking at challenges affecting food and agricultural systems in Asia from the perspectives of small family farmers, and how we can help support and strengthen their capacity to meet this challenge. So what do I actually mean when I say food security? According to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, food security exists when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to safe, sufficient, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy lifestyle. It's a definition that captures a wide range of concerns that we have around people's access to food and malnutrition. But the way it's formed, and many people have pointed this out, like Raj Patel, that this definition doesn't really capture issues around power and control. So questions like, who actually controls the world's agricultural resources? Who decides how we actually use them? Who actually has access to them? And what does this access look like? Questions like these have serious implications for the functioning of our food and agriculture systems, and everyone who's a part of them, including small family farmers. So why are small family farmers like Chia the most significant people when it comes to global food security? By their very nature, small family farms are our best shot at meeting global food security needs in a sustainable manner in the face of climate change. Research shows us that small family farms actually produce much higher levels of agricultural output per unit area of land compared to larger farms. And they're actually more efficient in that they get much more out of the land in relation to what they put in, compared to agribusinesses. So, why is this? It may sound odd, but unlike agribusinesses and corporations, small family farmers are not entirely driven by profit maximization. The farm is a source of income for them, but it also provides food for the family and the livestock. They have a deep-rooted emotional connection to the land and respect for the land. Often their cultural identities are very closely intertwined with the farm, and the land may also have religious or other symbolic value. Small family farms also tend to embrace agroecological farming principles that make them complex and diverse. Agroecology basically means agriculture that has been designed and is used in ways that are ecologically sustainable. It's traditional, it's holistic, and it takes a locally adapted approach. It involves growing multiple crops at the same time, and the crop diversity actually generates encourages natural pest control, soil enrichment, and pollination. It also helps diversify the financial risk for the family, because then they don't rely on that one single crop. The UN has actually said that agroecology is the way forward in terms of meeting the challenge of global food security as we feel the impacts of climate change. But despite of all of this, small family farmers like Chia continue to face a host of challenges that undermine their ability to keep doing what they're good at. They grow the vast majority of the food in the world, but they actually form the majority of those who are hungry and poor. In fact, in developing countries, the poorest households can spend between 50 to 80% of their incomes on food alone. And that's why when food prices rise sharply and suddenly, households like Chia's can't afford to eat. So they cope by eating less or eating poorly, cutting back on essentials, and selling things that they can get money for, like livestock, land, and machinery. And this, of course, has implications, adverse implications, for their ability to pull themselves out of poverty. And despite their remarkable ability to stay resilient in the face of variations in climate, small farmers have been adapting to variations in climate since the advent of agriculture. They know what works best locally, and it's helped them to stay resilient in the face of variations in climate. However, they are the most vulnerable when it comes to the large-scale impacts of climate change, and they're the least equipped to be able to deal with them. They're vulnerable because they're poor. They don't have assets to fall back on in order to recover from climate-induced disasters and crop failures, and they have very limited capacity to resort to other livelihoods. They also lack key agricultural facilities, services, and even access to key food-growing resources, like farmland. The International Fund for Agricultural Development tells us that land tenure security is the bedrock of small family farming. When farmers are confident that they're not going to lose access to their land in the long run, they tend to invest in their farming and use their resources in a sustainable manner because they believe that they and their families stand to benefit from these investments in the long run. When they fear losing access to their land, they tend not to make such investments, and in doing so make themselves more vulnerable to hunger and poverty, and also undermine their ability to use these resources in a sustainable manner, these resources that are vital to their way of life and livelihoods, and to regional and global food security. The power of small family farms like Chia's is being championed by a range of voices, and there are a number of national and international organizations that are actually working to help strengthen their capacity to meet global food security needs. And this includes working to get recognition for their land rights and enhancing their overall access to land. One of the things that became apparent to me in my research was that although governments in developing countries in the region have identified food security as a key policy priority, they continue to lack a holistic perspective. For them, agriculture remains a primarily economic activity. And policymaking that emerges from this perspective tends to be blind to the damaging impacts it can have on the livelihoods and food security of local communities. Take Vietnam, for example. It's a country that has gone from importing rice in the 1980s to one of the largest rice exporting countries today. Rice exports have been identified by the government as a key avenue towards economic growth. And in 2009, it introduced this goal of reserving a significant portion of its farmland for rice farming exclusively. But small family farmers in Vietnam can't survive on rice farming alone. And they tend to diversify and grow other crops like fruits and vegetables, keep livestock, and even do a bit of non-farm work. Reserving farmland exclusively for rice production denies these farmers the opportunity to enhance their incomes by growing other crops, especially in regions that are not environmentally suited to rice farming. One of the most eye-opening moments for me was when I was interviewing government officials at the heart of food and agricultural policymaking in the Philippines for my book in 2011. Now, the Philippines is a country where there are still relatively high levels of poverty and hunger. It's highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. It's regularly battered by cyclones that destroy entire crops and damage agricultural resources. So as I sat there talking to these officials, my pen poised to make notes, I asked, what did they make of the government's policy at the time of making the Philippines self-sufficient in rice production by 2014? They all nodded their heads and said, yes, it's a good policy. It's achievable. Something about this didn't seem quite right to me, because I'd done my research. So I put my pen down and I said, off the record, what do you think? And the response that I got this time around was starkly different. Many of these officials forthrightly dismissed this policy and said that the government should instead be focusing on diversifying people's diets so they're more nutritious, and encouraging farmers to diversify the range of crops they grow on their farms so that they become more resilient in the face of climate change. It really brought home to me how governments often willingly pursue policies that actually undermine those very goals that they claim to be driven by in the first place. So, what needs to change? At a local level, we can all help make a difference by getting to know where our food comes from, who our local farmers are, and buying locally grown produce. Our support to our local farmers is not just an environmentally sustainable act, it's a political act that can help shift government policies in the long run. We can support small family farmers in Asia and around the world by supporting the work of organizations like Oxfam and ActionAid, amongst others, who are doing a tremendous amount of work working with local organizations, communities, and governments to help strengthen the capacity of small family farmers. Finally, we need to keep challenging this idea that agriculture is a purely economic activity. For large agribusinesses and giant corporations, that is what it ultimately is. But what governments and policymakers need to understand that agriculture is a multifunctional activity. It gives us a whole range of social, economic, cultural, and environmental benefits. And small family farmers get that. And that's why they are the most significant actors when it comes to meeting the challenge of global food security. Thank you.